Pauline. So ki te atua, ki te whenua, ki te moana o Tarangi, haere, tēnā koutou katoa, kai whakahaere a toi arotia roa, tēnā koutou katoa. So, why is a mining person who spent a decade in mining, working for a multinational mining company, coming to talk to the arts sector about putting communities and peoples first? I'll come to that. So, as Cass said, my father gave me that advice when I was driving out of the driveway on my first day of work. He also said, find a job you really like, because you're working for the next 40 years. But that point about relating to people from different walks of life, I think has been central to the work that I've done, whether it's been in the sports industry, John, hello, whether it's been in local government, whether it's been in international mining. The point about working and relating to different people and feeling comfortable sitting in the Bunnythorpe Tavern or sitting in the Mayor's office or having dinner with the PM as I did last night at the field days, is central to that whole point about relativity and understanding where people come from. And I think that's translational leadership skills and being able to translate between those different lived experiences. And the lived experience concept is what Anjum Ranam is now talking about, and that she has lived as a Muslim person in New Zealand. And that lived experience and putting people first at the centre of things is really, really important. And you can do that. And I think we talk about it, but I don't think we really know how to do it. So mining, I think, has done it. And you might query that, but I'm going to give you some examples around how we do that. So, I'm pushing the wrong thing. This thing. So this happened in Waihi back in 2001. There was a house that fell in a hole that was a void from historic mining. So historic mining started in the 1850s in Waihi. There were 700 kilometres of tunnel built under that town, under the Martha mine, and at one stage the big hole in the ground that is there now, the Martha mine, was the world's biggest mine. What that was a void. The size of this room, where they didn't used to backfill, has made its way to the top. And there was a whole part of that community that fell into disrepair, and houses had to be removed in 2001, and there was a major drama. So why is it, and how did we get to a point in 2012 where we successfully worked with the community to have the first lot of modern mining underneath people's homes? And putting people at the centre of the discussion around the project and how we started that is the key to that. So, to back up my father's advice, read these two books. So Strategy for Sustainability by Adam Werchek and Resilience by Alexandra Tolley. And there's another book you should read by Peter Sandman, which talks about responding to community outrage and dealing with communities. Those three books are really important. And there's also some work you should look at under John Ruggie. So the UN, he talks about respect, remedy, and reputation of human rights in the centre of people. And if you can get to those points and put that into your programming. So this is all theoretical, but I'm going to move on. So corporate social responsibility, what is it? Actually, it says that, but what it's really about is what we're all talking about nowadays because of, in the face of climate catastrophe and growing differences between those who have and those who have not, housing shortages, worldwide issues. What we're really saying is we expect companies and behaviours and businesses to operate better, and we expect leadership to operate in a way that responds to societal issues, not simply under old Adam Smith, make money, because that's not enough. So what is resilience? It's actually about a community's ability to adapt to change, but hold its core purpose. And I think we can all see that change is today's new normal. And if we can't hold the sustainability concept, which is there's a point where you can't go beyond, and change is coming, and let's say we're already past that fulcrum point and we need to adapt, how resilient are our communities to adapt and how fast can they move? And a couple of weeks ago I was at a Philanthropy New Zealand conference where Shamabeel Yakov, Stephen Tyndall and others spoke about it's not going to happen through government. Change is going to happen through philanthropy and people with means and communities driving the change that they want to see, because government works at incremental pace and still operates in a diametrically opposed argument. Yes, we like it. No, we don't. And no argument is yes or no. Arguments are whole lots of grey. So let's keep moving on. So why is it important? Because of this. Fundamentally, corporate social responsibility or social performance or ESG is all about trust, and trust is broken. So the Edelman Barometer, Trust Barometer, it's been running now for about a decade, is a piece of work that said in 2017, trust had broken down across all 4 sectors that they operate in. So civil society, NGOs, governments, and business. And only 15% of civil society believed that the system was now working in their favour. So think about that. 15% of people in society don't believe the system, only 15% of us believe the system works for us. Trust is broken, right? We don't trust our politicians. The only people we tend to trust, here's what's really interesting, is our direct leaders and our direct CEOs, or our direct bosses, because the relationship is one-to-one. So if you think about how we're going to get change, it's you and how you lead people and how you design projects with communities at the face. Because it's not going to come from legislation, it's not going to come from regulation, it has to be about what do you put in the middle when you start designing your programs. And so I'm going to challenge you a little bit about who that is and what that does. So here's Old Man Jack. Old Man Jack was an elder in the Tanami Desert. Tanami Desert is, if you take Alice Springs in Australia and you draw a line up to Darwin, that big empty space in the middle, it's bang in the middle. It takes you 10 hours to four-wheel drive there, it takes you 5 hours to fly there from Perth. Old Man Jack, when I met him in 2012, was about 93, they think. They don't really know. But he remembers meeting his first white man at about the age of 8 or 9. Now, he's a tribal elder. He had mining on his land. When one of the big companies first turned up and talked to him, they said to him, "Hey, Old Man Jack, we're going to give you $10 million to be able to mine your land." And he said, "No, I want 20. They said, "All right, we'll give you 12. And he went, "I want 24. And they went, "Oh, no, we'll give you 14. He said, "Cool, I want 30. And they went, "Hey, wait, that's not how it works." And he said, no, what you don't understand is you're assuming we want your money and that you're assuming we have a life that's going to be different with what you're bringing. So we don't want that." When we come along and we talked to Old Man Jack, I said to him, "How is it that you started working with us?" And he said, "Because the first question you asked us was, what is it that you want to achieve for your people and your land?" And that was the start of the dialogue. Now, it was a bit more complicated than that, but generally that was the gist of the way that we changed it quite differently from being an economic discussion to, well, what do you want to achieve and how can we help you do that with what we're able to bring to the table? There's another story in Jundee. So Jundee is on the Western Sandy Desert, and we had been working for years to try and get Aboriginal employment numbers up. So Aboriginal unemployment's huge in those communities. It's a transient community. 50% of those communities come in and out. They're nomadic tribes. It still goes on today. And we stopped and we said, "Hey, well, let's ask the community about what they think employment is and what it means to them." Because what we did is we employed them and we put them underground, we put them on trucks, and we put them into businesses, and they had to be there 9 days on, 5 days off, 12-hour shifts. Man, I don't want to do that, right? Like, why would they want to do that? And when we asked them what they wanted to do, they said, "Well, work for us is working on country, pest eradication, planting, rehabilitation, building mana through us working on the land. How can you help us achieve that?" Now, we have to do that as a mining company, right? Rehabilitation and planting and pest control and all those things are required. But then what we said was, "How often do you want to work?" And they said, "We only want to work as individuals as much as I need for my immediate future, and then I want to be able to hand it on to my brother or my sister to do the next bit of work." So what we did was we just bundled up work. We said, "Here's the work to be done, and we've got, that's going to get 10 grand, and you've got a month to do it." Now, we don't care whether you give it to 2 people and it takes you the whole month, or whether you do it in 1 week and you do 4, and you have 40 people doing it. That's over for you to decide. And what we found is that that worked really well because they could bring in their brothers and sisters to do the work. They earned what they needed. They handed it on. They did it if they had funeral, or if they had men's business or secret ones. They did that stuff, but the work still got done the way they operate, in the way that they want to support their mob. Right? So simply asking the question, how do you want to work with us? What does employment mean to you? And the huge different change in outcomes. And it's all about your perceptions. Data is useful, but it doesn't change things. So here's Melissa Williamson. She's 35, from Roanoke, somewhere in the States. And she's really worried about the sound of jackhammers while she stands. The sound of jackhammers on her baby or her unborn child as she stands there with a cigarette. So perceptions, right? their basis is, she's worried about the jackhammers, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what they are complaining about versus what fears actually are and how we get to the bottom of that. Perceptions and emotions, and that's really important to understand because you can have all the data in the world, but if you're going to try and fight values and emotions without putting people first, you won't get your projects, you won't get the outcomes you're after. So, back to Waihi. That blue, actually I've got one of these things, that bit there was what we're talking about for the first time. So this big hole, if you ever drive through Waihi, there's the main street. How many of you have been to Waihi before? How many passed through Waihi going to Coromandel? How many knew there was a big hole in the ground? Excellent. All right, so that had been going for a long, long time, since the 80s. We've been working out over here underground, and this was the first chance to find a seam underneath that. So that created lots of drama, as you can imagine. And people would be rightly worried. So we went out and we did data. Now I'll tell you why we did data, because we thought we knew that audience. We looked at the Waihi East and we said, we know that audience, we know that community. They're elderly people, they're home a lot, they're unemployed, and so therefore our tactics to work with them will be this. What happened was we thought, well, hang on, let's understand what they think about us, because we don't really know that. But what we found was our assumptions were wrong. We had huge blind spots because we were so involved in the organisation and so involved in the people that we deal with all the time. That was all we knew. So let me walk you through that. When I joined there as the manager at Waihi, our next earliest employee had been there 9 years. So the person who had been there, the eldest, or longest, had been there from the day that it opened. So we had this longevity of experience which had created blind spots. The people we dealt with in that community that were elderly, unemployed, and always home were the ones who complained the most because they got the most impact from noise and dust. So we said, that's what that community looks like. What we found out was when we did the data, and we found out who our audience was, is that they were actually younger people with professional jobs who travelled away a lot and had chosen to live in Waihi for residential. They all had young families, and they were all connected in some way to our workforce. So completely different to what we thought. And if we run a program around working with them on running an underground mine, we were completely wrong. Our whole tactics were wrong because we thought our audience was, we thought we knew. And the challenge I have to you is that when you're sitting in positions of leadership, when you think you know what the answer is, have you done the work to find out whether you know who your audience is? And when we talk about community, we go the great unwashed community, right? This massive, amorphous mass of people. But actually, within that community are tribes, and there's tribal groups and tribalism, and there's different sects and age groups and all those things. And if you're designing a specific program in mind without understanding who you're targeting and who your audience is, and you haven't done work, then you're going to miss the boat. And this is really important about putting people first. So the perception thing was really important too. Did we have enough social capital? Did we have enough credibility, reputation and trust with the community that we could go out and put this really controversial project in front of them? And should we even bother? Should we even start? So that's really fundamental. So data is really important in that space. But this here, procedural fairness, is a concept. It's actually an academic concept that was done on the work we did at Waihi by a guy that I have a bit of a boy crush on, Dr. Kieran Stewart, who works out of CSIRO in Australia. They've done the academic work, they've got mathematicians and a whole lot of, but what this basically premise says is the best indicator of getting projects through is trust. If you have trust with your community and your audience and they trust you to deliver, you can deliver projects. And trust is simply made up of two really simple things: quality and quantity of communication. So feedback loops, listening, doing it well, listening is the big thing, giving good information, making it clear, all the good things that we probably know. But the other part is, can your audience see a change in your behaviour because of the feedback they've given you? So how often do we hear overload of community and feedback? How often do we hear, consultation, death by consultation? And how do we hear, we're going to go out and talk to the community again, and the community go, well, why? You're not going to change. I worked at a council for 2 years, right? I know how that works. So unless you're prepared to change your behaviour as a result of the communication and listen and do things, and people can see that you have changed because of that, don't bother starting. But if you want to build trust, that's how you do it. We do that every day, right? The way we build trust with our kids is we give them the opportunity. They say they're going to go and do something, be home by 11. When they get home by 11, you trust them. When they don't get home by 11, you erode a little bit of that capital, right? That social trust. So it's not a hard concept to grasp, but it's one we just don't think about. And it's something that's really imperative to how we've designed what we've done. So if we say we're going to do something, we do it. If we can see an issue that we can resolve, we resolve it. And when I first got to the mine, all those people that we thought we knew in our community who used to complain all the time, we had a register every morning, who's been complaining overnight, and they go, oh, it's bloody Kelvyn again. And we say, hang on, let's just stop talking about the bloody Kelvyns and the bloody Marys and the other people. What's the issue they're raising? Is the issue important? Can we do something about that issue? And once we focused on the issue and went back to them and said, hey, we can actually fix that, because we're taking it seriously, we built trust. So you've got to start to build that, and you've got to have this buy-in across your whole organisation. So this was real. And that photo I showed you right at the start, you can imagine was everywhere, right? Not everybody, but a pretty vocal. And the first thing we did was we sat down and we said, all right, okay, they're really worried about their property. There was lots of issues. Ironically, they weren't worried about their house falling in a hole, because they understood the modern mine, they'd been around a long time. Our initial executive said, oh, but it's no different to having a subway running underneath your house if you live. Well, that's wrong, right? It is different, because we don't live in London. People live in Waihi for a quiet community aspect. But what we found out was, is it about preserving property values? Is that really the issue? And when we dealt with the community more, and we actually got independents in to come and speak to the communities, and what we found out was, it wasn't the property values they were worried about. What they were really worried about is, you've trapped us. Because if I want to leave, or if I have to leave, or if I want to sell my home, I can't, because you're mining underneath it and no one's going to want to buy our house. So you've got to get that point. Before I said about the girl with the smoke and worried about she's talking about the jackhammers, but that's probably not the main thing she's really worried about. She'll be worried about ongoing nuisance, or she's probably worried about what the intended building will be, and you've got to get to the bottom of what the actual issues are. So the issue, when we started talking to these people about, hey, do you feel trapped? Are you scared that you're not going to be able to get away? They're like, yeah. Okay. And property values is just a symptom of that, because if we reduce their property values, they can't sell, they can't move on, no one's going to want to buy. So that's how you get to the bottom of the address, and that's what we had to really dive into. And when we went out and talked to those people, it wasn't me, and it wasn't my staff. So the point I made before about those most trusted are those that they live next to, we trained up a whole lot of workforce, so people they live next door to, their neighbours, and we trained them up to go and talk to their neighbours. So then they can just talk very simply about the issues and what's really bothering them without actually having to talk to the manager, the white leather-shoed salesman with the silver tongue. That's not what we were there for. So we had to look at all of our ways of trying to engage with our audience, which is different to just us knowing all the time. So what do? We also realised pretty clearly that there's a massive power imbalance. We're a multinational company. At that time, we were the second biggest gold mining company in the world. They're now the biggest. And these are a group of volunteers and homeowners. We've got people who know the RMA process. They've never dealt with the RMA process. There's resources. We've got cash. They've got donations and what they can put together. So how do we create this sense of take the power imbalance away and actually enable people to engage at a proper level? And when we're talking about power imbalances in your organisation, how many times do your executive or your governance say, yep, we want to be transformational? You go, wicked. And you go away and you do everything I've just said, and then you come back and go, this is what we have to do, this is how we have to change. And they go, oh, no, you have to do it. Be transformational in the same way that the same staff and the same budgets and the same structures, just go and be different, right? So there's a lesson there in terms of if you're going to get change, you're going to talk about change, you really need to have buy-in at the top. So we turned up and we sat around 4 months talking about how we're going to fix this issue. And actually, Stefan Darby, who was my replacement, said, well, what about if we just go out and say we don't have the answer? And you can imagine our executive, particularly the legal team, no, you can't do that. And actually, as the person leading the project, I said, well, why not? We can do that. Let's go and do that. Let's just tell them. Because the point was, we knew through the data and the perception work that we were seen as part of the community. So we went out there and we said, hey, we've got this problem. We, collectively, how do you think we could solve it? And the blank page was literally that, sitting down in meetings, talking about how, and we come out with this. How do we preserve property and community values? So not turning that whole part of town, because initially the answer was, well, you need to buy all of our homes. And we're like, well, hang on, we can't do that, because then we're a company town, and that's not the community values, and we don't want that. People don't want that. And so what we did was we set up a community forum that actually went through a whole election process alongside local government. So we ran, and people put themselves forward, people who were opposed put themselves forward, and the community voted for that representation to then bring ideas to the table. The community forum had the ability to identify issues and set budgets within the same parameters that we did for the project for them to find resolution around issues. It was a mixture of council, so regulator, they have to be there, the company, but the community representatives were the majority number at that table. And we talk about trusting communities, the communities voted good people. They didn't vote the really opposite people who were really opposed, and they didn't vote the people who were stridently for. They voted for the good people who put their hands up, who were reasoned trying to find the right outcomes for the community. So we trusted that that would happen, and it has, and it did. And I think you've got to trust that the community will step forward if you've got the right proposition and the right opportunities. So a town-wide election for that. They then said, hey, we want to run an ombudsman, so an independent review panel that the community forum will appoint to make decisions where we believe we're too closely associated with individuals. So that was about things like someone who who was seriously ill, someone who had had major trauma in their family, someone who had some other issue going on and just needed us to exit. Because remember, the issue was they couldn't exit. And that independent review panel would just come to us and say, you need to buy their property, and we would, fine. No questions. So that was all designed by the community. Not by me, not by the company, just designed by the community with the parameters and the same as the project as a whole. And it was just included as part of the project. So you've got to trust the community will come with the right answers. And it's not easy. You know, I'm giving you sort of 12 months or 18 months worth of work in about 30 minutes, but you've got to do it. So here's some lessons, right? Data is really very useful. Like I said, do you know your audience? Do you know who they are? Do you know who you're trying to contact? And when you talk about communities, do you really know who's in that community? Or is it just through your own interaction that you think you know? And often the worst people at that, God help me, this is probably going to create some drama, are community development people. Because they know their community. No, you know the people you connect with. That's who you know. And what we found out through this exercise is actually there's a whole lot of people we didn't connect with, we didn't know, and actually had a voice that we wouldn't have otherwise heard. And it identified our blind spots. It made us realise that our tactics were wrong. It also persuaded technical staff. So what you'll find is, in your sphere, you'll be doing some great creative work, you'll be doing community development work, and then the technical staff, the accountants or the engineers or whoever, the legal, will go, well, you're just making that up. It's social development stuff. That's just assumption. But actually data gives you the social science credibility to point and say, actually, no, this is why we are making those assumptions. And when they say the work that we do is full of assumptions, turn around to an engineer and say, well, how do you build up your engineering models? I bet you there's a huge amount of assumptions in each one of those models, right, backed up by some data, but there's assumptions in there. So don't let them try and tell you that technical people don't use assumptions. So should we even start? Did we have enough social capital? All those good things. And remember, data informs strategy. It's not the strategy. So coming back to that first point I made, translational leadership. Do you have people in your organisation who can lead and talk to different parts of the community and then bring that back and talk the business language that you need to get it over the line internally and then go back out and speak a different language of the community? And actually, there's lots of us who think we're really good at it, but in fact, there's not many of us who are good at it. Because you either can't speak the language of the business and the economics and the legal and you can't, or you're one of those people and you can't do the other. You can learn it and you can get better at it. But don't believe that we're just, I spent the first 6 months in mining just learning the language of mining. Didn't even talk to anyone outside because I needed to be able to explain it properly if I was going to talk to people. So it informs the strategy, it's not the strategy. So the art and science of this work is always important. Hey, this is probably something really amazing, right? People matter. There's nothing new about this. But that point up there, consultation is dependent on goodwill. So that's social capital. That didn't happen in the 12 months that we were working. You build trust over the first time that you start doing the work. So the modern mining started in 1987, and we realised that the way that that mine had been operating since 1987 had either built or eroded capital all the way along that journey. So it's not you turning up and going, hey, here's a new project, trust us. It's what interaction did you have or your agency have with that community all the way along. So when you go back to the Edelman barometer around trust, and people don't trust governments or social service agencies or NGOs, it's not because of the people there now, it's because of their interaction with them over a series of years. So somehow you've got to break that cycle and start if you haven't got that trust on time. Your biggest bottleneck may be in your organisation. So the point I made before, you think it's great, management all saying it's wicked, governance go for it, but actually what you need to do to change, they haven't really bought into what you need to change. And what you'll find is that governance go, yep, cool, executive management, yep, get it, and then you drop to that third tier and the person who's only worried about doing their budgets and their finances, the accountant, they don't want to change because that mucks up how they do things. And the procurement people don't have to change because it's, oh, hang on, that's a bit hard. Oh, legally you can't, I'd advise you not to do that. My answer to that is, I've always understood that we advise our lawyer, right? So I give you instruction and you tell me how to get there. All of those different strands at that third tier and below will start going, oh, hang on, we haven't bought into this. So you need to work up and down your organisation and across it when you're starting to look for design principles that have people at the middle of it. Bring in fresh eyes and new perspectives. We brought in psychologists to make us understand what fear is. We brought in people who hadn't been involved in the mine to say, what do you think? We spoke to the Greens. We had iwi involved because they were talking about the wairua of the land and how moving land from one place to another, how does that engage and what do they think about that? So we brought in new eyes. We had people that had never been involved in mining and just said, do you think this will work? How will it work? And that's that blind spot, just the things you're so involved in and so ingrained in, particularly in sectors like the arts or the community, we're so passionate about what we do, we forget that there's a whole lot of other people out there who are looking at it completely differently. So, Melissa with her cigarette has a different viewpoint to those of us who are involved all the time. So, even though biggest bottleneck can be internal, your internal staff on the ground are your best advocates. And how many times have you developed a program and you've got it all signed off and you go out there and your frontline staff go, oh, what's this? What are we doing? Right? So in a council, when I was General Manager of City Growth, we had 1,100 staff and we started with them. This is what we're trying to achieve. So these are the key messages we want you to understand and how you play a role in that. So have you heard the NASA story? So the NASA story is this. Back in the 1950s, NASA was going to the moon. There was a journalist. He was going to see the rockets. He saw a guy sweeping the floor. Said to that guy, hey, what do you do here? The guy could have said, I'm a janitor. What he said was, I'm part of the team putting a man on the moon. So he understood his purpose was to make that floor as clean as possible to get the man on the moon. He was the frontline staff, but he knew what his role was and what the achievement and what the purpose was of that organisation. In the same vein, all the people who worked in that mine knew exactly what we were trying to achieve, how we were trying to do it. And if you haven't got your frontline staff working as your advocates, then you're missing an opportunity. I know I'm running out of time. Okay, trust matters. Another, who would have known? But that blank page concept and saying, hey, we've got an issue. Not just the mine, we've got an issue we need you to help with, really gave us some credibility. And we really did ask. We said, we don't have a solution. Help us find ways to do that. And we listened. We just didn't sit there and go, no, can't do that. No, we can't do that. We said, we'll take it away, we'll look at it, and we'll bring it back. So that closed out loop of communication, and people could see that we'd changed, and we came back with some different variations, and that takes a long time, but you've got to build into it. And those independent panels gave us huge amounts of ability, and we surrendered the power to that group. Let them make decisions on our behalf. That's what we've got to do, and we trusted our community. Okay, so bringing that into this thing in the arts community. This thing here will be the Waikato Regional Theatre. And I want to talk a little bit about the structures and how we got to what it was. So it's a 1,300-seat theatre on the banks of the river. It's a combined set of hotels, 42 rooms, 5-star boutique. It's a private partnership with public monies. And it happened because the old Founders Theatre got to a point where it was seismically dangerous and had to be closed down. It was going to cost the council $30 million just to get it back to a point where they could use it. And there would still be no hot water in the ladies' toilets, and there'd still be the same shitty old seats. But there was, for $30 million, you got a safer building. So our board said, hey, we're here to be transformative. So what Momentum Waikato do as a community foundation, we're building $300 million for the region to enable these projects over time through bequests and donations, and we've got that currently at 26 mil. We said, well, we'll take on the leadership of this. We'll take it out of council, and council, to their credit, surrendered that power and said, we trust the board and we trust the community can do this better than we can, and we'll commit a portion of our 30 million. They could have done with the whole 30 million, but they're going to commit a portion of that. In fact, they only ended up doing 19, but there's a whole story behind that. Hey, Sarah. Anyway, we'll get to that. And they gave it to Momentum and said, you've got a board of professional directors. We trust your CEO, which is interesting, because I used to work for them. And they said, go and see if you can make this thing work. So we set up, we started off as a board and with the engagement of the community, looking at outcomes. So we didn't look to design the theatre, we said, what are the outcomes we want to achieve? And the theatre is just the tool. It could have easily been a swimming complex or a stadium or a high-performing arts centre, but it was the theatre was the opportunity to achieve, oops, I've gone too far, sorry, go back, to achieve those outcomes. So the initial discussions weren't about who's going to do it and what colour it's going to be and who's going to be the primary user. It was what's the outcomes we want for the city that the theatre should provide. And from that, we started to think about what are the structures that we needed to develop. So this is a boring structure diagram, but here's the thing. So that's me and my team, and we drive a whole lot of cash, and we're doing that. And I can tell you we're now at 55 million of the 73.9 we need, and if we get the PGF by the end of this month, we'll be ready to go. We've got a governance panel who came together that doesn't have an arts person as such sitting on that group. But what they are really good at is tendering processes, running process for community engagement, and I have to give a big ups to Sarah Nathan from Creative Waikato, because she was the conduit of that group that brought the voice of the users to the table about what they needed and how often they'd use it and what it looked like. But the board, the governance panel, went, cool. All right, so therefore, how do we make that look so it achieves those outcomes? They weren't worried about who had primary use and who was going to have the biggest stage presence and who, not their game, right? What's the outcome, and if we can get this concept design through charcoal blue to deliver on those outcomes and meet the needs of the users, that's what their job is. So serenity and power. This group over here, the Property Trust, which we've put together since, they have no interest in what's going to happen in the theatre. Their interest is in, will it be maintained? Have we got the budget to maintain it? Because what we all know, if you've been involved with any big capital projects, the thing that sinks theatres and other capital projects is the lack of maintenance. And the reason that Hamilton and city councils throughout the country are in the problems that they're in is because no one's put any large capital investment into infrastructure, roading, wastewater since the 1990s, the big remove of local government. And because they're all on a 3-year voting pattern, no one wants to put maintenance because it increased rates. So they haven't done it, and now things are at the end of their life, including theatres and swimming pools and water treatment stations and roads. That's where we're at in New Zealand, people, and that's why we need to shake up and big investment into infrastructure. But anyway, that's another story. So that group isn't worried about what's going to happen in there. They just want to maintain it, and they will set up an operating company who will be worried about what happens in there. They will be worried about the delivery and the outcome, but all of the groups, when they talk about what happens in those spaces, are worried about the outcome first, and the theatre's the tool to get there. So they surrender that power. Because the real vision is the building is the building is the building. And to be quite honest, I love the idea of the building, but I don't have a view on whether it's a nice looking building or a bad looking building. It's just a building. But what I'm really interested in is the stuff that's going to happen inside there. So I should have told you my father, right at the start of this, two worlds. He could relate to people. He was a truck driver during the day, and in the evenings he was one of New Zealand's great jazz pianists and played in dance halls throughout the lower Manawatu with the Roger Fox Big Band and all of those jazz in Wellington. And he literally shook hands with the mayor and hung out with the street sweeper and the truck drivers during the day. And it's what happens in that theatre and the opportunity for kids. And our vision that we've actually got to is that every child in the Waikato gets to experience and perform on an international standard stage. And that's what drives every decision we make by each one of those structures. And at the table, there's not one of you yet. But the people of the Waikato and the ballet and the New Zealand Ballet and the opera, they've all had input and constant feedback into what they need to make it work, and the loops go back and, hey, does this fit? Charcoal Blue have been leading that with Sarah Nathan. Will this achieve? Yes, it will, cool. The governance panel, right, now does that achieve the outcomes, and does it fit the scope, and can we get it to budget? Kelvyn, can you raise the money? Yes, we can. Keep on moving. And it's that surrendering of power to get the outcomes as opposed to wanting to own what it looks like and what colour it is and who's going to run it and those things that often blow apart community-based projects. So that's what it is. 1,300 seats. I think it says 11 up there, but it's 1,300 seats. Because initially we started at 1,100, founders was 13, we need to be 13. It's a lyric theatre. I mean, I don't understand a lot of the technical terms, and I don't need to, because I'm not going to be the one using it. I need to know that that will deliver the outcomes we want in terms of the outcomes for the city. That's what it looks like. So it's not just the theatre, it's not just what happens inside it. We've actually started talking about the ecosystem that the theatre operates in. So we've got Riverlea Community Theatre, we've got the Media or Black Box, we've got Clarence Street, Jason's in the room here somewhere I saw before. Clarence Street Theatre, we've got the Wintec Performing Arts Academy, University of Waikato Performing Arts Academy and their studies, we've got Wintec, we've got performing groups, we've got Bold, we've got... So what does that now look like as an ecosystem? And we're starting the tentative steps to look for a recruitment for a GM who will start putting that ecosystem together. Because if all we do is those governance structures right at the building, we won't get the outcomes. The building's not the outcome, it's what happens inside it and what happens around it that drives the outcome. So again, we've surrendered some power about, actually, we need to pull all that stuff together, but we're not worried as to what actually the outputs are. We just know we need to make it happen. So again, people-centric, who's at the centre of it? Not us. And I really like this quote from Maya Angelou, people forget what you said, people forget what you did, but they'll never forget how they make you feel. And that's really the centre of the whole thing. So when my son was 10 years old, they took me to Matilda, Tim Winton's up in the Civic Theatre, he walked in there, and he, by the end of it, what's going on? At the end of it, he was in tears. He was moved to tears at 10 years old age. Right? And I put my hand up, and so I used to be a stand-up comedian, I was really bad at it, and I did amateur theatre, and I play guitar and sing, and that's about it. But it's that moment of feeling, and that's really what we want to see on opening night, and that's what we want to see for the Waikato, because it's that sense of... We've had Stan Walker, he did a singer-songwriter workshop. We could have run that workshop every day for 3 weeks, such was the demand. In the Rock Quest, the bands out of Waikato were the biggest percentage of people who attended were from the Waikato. So we know there's an ecosystem that we just need to unlock. And that's the work of Creative Waikato and others, and Orchestra Central, and all those good people, and Jason and all that who are involved. And those two young ladies on the side. That was in Whangamata, actually. So takeaways, really quickly. I can look down here. So do you know who your audience is? Do you actually understand them? Do you have a profile of who they are? And I know that sounds kind of weird, right? A profile of age and demographics, but that stuff's actually really important to your design, because that's central to who they are, what they earn and where they do, all that stuff. If you don't know that, you're really just talking from a blind spot perspective. You're talking through a lived experience of the people you live with, not with those who are still on the outside, because there's always people on the outside. Do you understand your internal capabilities, and have you got that buy-in right through the organisation? And when you need to change to achieve the transformation, have you got that buy-in? Are you prepared to change your structures? Is the organisation prepared to give you that budget? Change the processes around procurement, recruitment, whatever it is you need to get that transformative bit around that design of that program. Because if they're not, don't start. Because that's your bottlenecks. And what you end up with is a half-assed delivery of what you actually wanted. Design horizontally, up and down. No, horizontally sideways, just testing, and up and down, right? So the whole thing, make sure everyone knows what you're trying to achieve and how that operates in your agency, and your first contacts of stakeholders, make sure they understand that. You focus on your third tier, so those accountants and your lawyers and your unit managers levels, because they're the ones who'll go, hang on, I'm just worried about making sure my budget balances and the recruitment thing works and the procurement thing works. Actually, you've got to change them because they're a big block. Frontliners, advocates, and that translational leadership, hugely important. Find people that can talk across and can sit with the community and sit with your executive and sit with your board. Because too often what happens is the people who design the program sit with the community, they do the design, and then the manager goes and sits with the executive, and then the executive goes and sit and present to the board. And if your organisation is not prepared to have you who's designing the program talking to the people, talk to the board, and be the critical friend, and tell them the things that they don't want to hear, John, but they probably do want to hear, but they don't hear it from the executive, then you're wasting your time. You've got to be that person. You've got to get that through. And procedural fairness, right? Building trust. At the end of the day, good programs have built trust. That's what it's all about. And procedural fairness. Communication, regular loops of communication, and can people see a change in your behaviour or delivery because of the input they've given? And that's me. Corporate Social Responsibility New Zealand, something I'm about to launch soon. Not yet, but it's coming. Thank you very much. Is there any questions? At this point, I think Cass said you're allowed to shoot me down or tell me that I'm all wrong, and that's fine. Or you can go. That's right. Cool? Nothing? Oh. Yeah, so corporate social responsibility in New Zealand it's lacking, right? So it's Sam Stubbs of Simplicity recently just did a survey of the banking sector of that. So corporate social responsibility is done well in parts. So come back to that. So Sam Stubbs, he found out that the banking sector only give about 5% of their revenue turnover as some form of corporate sponsorship owned by Australian banks. In Australia, they give out about 21%. So there's a real inequity. But our view of corporate sponsorship here is let's give money and take a photo, and that model doesn't match with what society wants. Air New Zealand are doing some really good things now. So what Air New Zealand are doing is they can't go in and invest into Gisborne, but what they can do is go, actually, Gisborne have got some of the best freshwater or seafood that we can utilise on our international flights, so let's make a proactive decision to partner with the iwi group in Gisborne to do the seafood provision and do a procurement opportunity. And that's the power of corporate social responsibility, because you're starting a circular economy. So they fly to Gisborne, but that's all they do. But now they fly to Gisborne and they also have a contract for their international. Like, that's actually corporate social responsibility. What have you got in your armoury, whether it's procurement, skills? Procurement's a big one. So at Waihi, we had lots of small businesses who clearly wanted to be part of what we were doing. So we said, yep, if you can procure it to the same standards and you can be within 15% of what we can get it from overseas, we'll take that 15% hit. So that's simple, right? That's just making a procurement discussion about what you're prepared to lift the increase of that community. Now, what we found out of that was then we became their only client, and if we ever closed down, we were buggered. So then we had to put in some other, then we were the problem because we were closed. So then we had to put in other conditions around make sure that we're only 50% of your income and all those other things. But that was quite useful. We had people who, if you ever want to see a slice of community, go to a mine site in the middle of the Australian desert or anywhere in the world, because you will sit at dinner with people who have been ex-gang members or ex-criminals who drive trucks, who have changed their lives and become some of the smartest people on the planet that I've ever met, engineers and chemists and financial people. It's a real slice of life. People that's that translational thing. You can sit in a donga in the middle of the desert and talk to people that you'd never normally see. So corporate social responsibility has to be more than simply giving out cash. And it's knowing what your impacts are in a community and responding to those and reducing that, but understanding what your strengths are. And in New Zealand, we focus on our impacts. So at the moment, it's all sustainability and waste reduction and LED lighting and electric cars. That's really important. But what we're not doing is going, hey, the strengths of what we offer as a corporate organisation or a business, even at a small town area, actually if we leverage that. So for example, we've invested in an organisation called Punya River Care. It was a marae-based social enterprise. It was 3 people working part-time, planting 10,000 people along the river of the Punya River. They came to us with a business plan and an idea to grow that to be a nursery. So we invested in them $300,000 as a social enterprise. We should have taken an equity cut. They've now employed 20 local people on the marae. They're planting over 500,000 trees a year. they're growing their own nursery, they're doing their own seed collection, they're now into pest control and fencing, and it's all based around increasing the wairua of the Punya River. So that's their starting point. It wasn't to run a business, it was to get the river better and give a place for their people to work. Shit, doesn't that sound familiar to the discussion about Jundee? So we come along, and then what we've done is we've gone to the regional council and said, hey, you've got about $100 million worth of river investment over the next 10-year plan. How about you develop a procurement strategy that enables these guys to do that work somewhere else? And then we had a better idea. Actually, why don't we work with all the marae and find out whether they want to do that, and if they do, we'll pay for Shannon to go and replicate that business all the way up and down the river. That's the strength that we can bring to the table from businesses. And then we didn't have to do that. All we did was we got the right people with the right skills to work with Shannon. So that's corporate social responsibility. It's understanding what strengths you have as an organisation and how you can leverage that against the outcomes your community want. And I guarantee you, most of the corporates don't know who their communities are. They know who their customers might be, but they don't know who their communities are. So Sky City is a classic example. Working with Sky City, they were all focused about buying carbon credits to reduce their carbon footprint. They were going to buy electric buses in China. Sounds pretty good. I said to them, when you look at your employee base, you've got this massive Pacific Island population, many of whom are immigrants from Pacific Islands. Why aren't we doing solar lighting or water control in the islands? Because that's your frontline staff who can tell your story to the family, and you're adding investment on top of yourself, but still achieving your carbon load. So little things like that, right? Just understanding where you can leverage your strengths and add value. That's missing in New Zealand. That's really missing in New Zealand. We don't get it yet. And our mining's had to do it because mining was bloody useless, right? 20 years ago. Some of them still are around the world, but in Australia particularly, they've mandated this stuff. Actually, it's in legislation and get it right, and now above and beyond. Good question. They do in Australia, in different parts of it. But what you find is legislation is at work if it's voluntary, if the organisation can understand it themselves. Because there's plenty of evidence now that shows good corporate social responsibility companies will operate at a higher level, be more efficient, and particularly with the millennial generation coming through, they want to work for purpose. We know from the work of the Edelman Trust Barometer that CEOs leading change is what workforces want. People want to work for those organisations. So where it's voluntary and they can build it into their strategies. And I'll tell you, governance in New Zealand, I sit on the IODMA charter, remember, this stuff around us is poor, quite frankly. They talk about ethics, and that's good, but nothing else. And they mention it in a 5-day workshop, they'll talk about it twice. And yet, this is the movement that we all are expecting from our businesses and our corporates and our regulation. Right? So it's a good question, because it's not done well, and it's better if it's done voluntary, but actually, in New Zealand, corporate social responsibility is sold by PR firms going, hey, it's reputation. It's not reputation, because if you need reputation work, you're probably already stuffed up. This is about building trust in the business. Sorry, I could go for hours. Thank you.